They looked at his skin before they looked at his name. They thought he was just another man sitting in first class, someone who didn't belong there. But when they served him moldy food, whispered insults behind his back, and mocked him for asking questions, they had no idea who they were dealing with. Because the man they disrespected wasn't just another passenger. He was the silent owner of the airline, the very one who built the surveillance system recording every second of their behavior. By the time that plane touched down, he didn't just expose their discrimination. He suspended the entire crew on the spot and changed the airline industry forever. You know, sometimes the most ordinary moments turn into something extraordinary. Sometimes a regular Tuesday morning becomes the day that changes everything. And for Jonathan Reed, that Tuesday started just like any other day, with a flight, a green suit, and absolutely no idea what was coming. Let me tell you this story, because it's not just about one man on one airplane. It's about something bigger, something that happens every single day, in ways both big and small, to people who look different, sound different, or simply don't fit into someone else's narrow idea of who belongs. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to that morning at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. Jonathan Reed walked through the airport terminal that morning, wearing his favorite suit. Not black, not navy blue, not the usual boring colors you see in business class. No, Jonathan wore an emerald green suit that caught the light and turned heads wherever he went. He loved that suit. It made him feel confident. It made him feel like himself. And honestly, it looked absolutely incredible on him. Now, Jonathan wasn't just any businessman. He was the CEO of Reed Tech Innovations, a company he'd built from nothing into a multi-million-dollar success. He traveled constantly, Atlanta to Los Angeles, New York to Chicago, London to Tokyo. The man had logged over 250,000 miles in the past 2 years alone. He had Diamond Elite status with practically every airline. He knew which airports had the best coffee, which lounges had the comfortable chairs, and which gates always ran late. Flying was as natural to him as breathing. But here's the thing about Jonathan that made this particular flight so interesting. He was also a silent partner in Liberty Airlines. Not many people knew this. He liked to keep it quiet, preferred to see how things really worked when nobody knew who he was. He'd invested in the airline 3 years ago because he believed in their mission statement, freedom and dignity for every traveler. Beautiful words, right? Jonathan was about to find out if Liberty Airlines actually meant them. Flight 228 to Los Angeles was scheduled to depart at 10:47 a.m. Jonathan arrived early, as he always did, breezed through TSA pre-check, and made his way to Gate B32. The morning sun streamed through the massive airport windows, and he felt good. Relaxed. Ready for a peaceful flight where he could catch up on work, maybe watch a movie, enjoy a nice meal. First class, baby. That's what all those miles were for. When boarding began, Jonathan was among the first to step onto the plane. The familiar smell of recycled air and cleaning products greeted him. He found his seat, 2A, right by the window, and settled in. He placed his leather briefcase in the overhead compartment, adjusted his green suit jacket, and sat down with a contented sigh. This was his happy place, 30,000 feet above the world, heading somewhere new. The first-class cabin was gorgeous, as always. Wide leather seats that reclined almost flat. Plenty of legroom. Little TV screens ready for entertainment. Around him, other passengers filed in. A businessman in a gray suit took 1A. A woman in pearls settled into 3B. An older couple claimed the seats across the aisle. And then came the flight attendants. The lead flight attendant was a woman named Heather Collins. Blonde hair pulled back tight, crisp uniform, professional smile. She moved through the cabin greeting passengers as they settled in. "Good morning, sir. Welcome aboard. Can I get you some champagne?" "Good morning, ma'am. So lovely to have you with us today. Champagne or orange juice? Welcome to first class. We're so happy you're flying with us. Would you like something to drink? Warm, friendly, genuine." And then she got to Jonathan. The smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She stopped at his seat, glanced down at him, and gave a tight nod. "Morning," she said flatly. That was it. No welcome aboard. No offer of champagne. Just morning. Jonathan felt it immediately. That subtle shift in energy. That coldness. But he pushed the feeling aside. Maybe she was tired. Maybe she was having a bad day. We all have those, right? Good morning, he replied with a warm smile. Could I get a glass of champagne, please? We'll be around with drinks shortly, Heather said, already turning away. And she was. She came around with drinks. Jonathan watched as she handed champagne and crystal flutes to every other passenger in first class. The businessman got champagne. The woman in pearls got champagne. The elderly couple got champagne. When Heather reached Jonathan again, she held out a plastic cup, the kind you get in economy, filled with orange juice. A plastic cup. In first class. Here you go, she said, not quite meeting his eyes. Jonathan stared at the plastic cup. I actually ordered the Macallan 18, he said politely. I pre-ordered it when I booked my ticket. Heather's expression didn't change. I don't see that in the system. Sometimes pre-orders get lost. We have orange juice or apple juice available. Jonathan glanced over at the galley. He could see the bar from where he sat. Bottles lined up, including, yes, the Macallan 18. Right there. Not empty. Not missing. Just not for him, apparently. That's all right, he said quietly, taking the plastic cup. Thank you. As Heather walked away, something twisted in Jonathan's stomach. It wasn't anger yet. It was something else. Something familiar and unwelcome. A feeling he'd spent his whole life trying to rise above. The feeling of being less than. Maybe you're thinking, come on, it's just a drink. Maybe they really did lose the order. And you know what? Maybe you're right. Maybe it was an honest mistake. But then came dinner service. The flight attendants rolled out their carts about an hour into the flight. The aroma of cooked food filled the cabin, garlic, herbs, something lemony and fresh. Jonathan's stomach rumbled. He'd skipped breakfast that morning. He watched as plates were delivered to his fellow first-class passengers. Beautiful presentations. The businessman in 1A received grilled salmon with lemon risotto, asparagus spears, and a warm roll with butter. The woman in pearls got herb-crusted chicken with roasted vegetables. The elderly couple shared excited glances over their meals, comparing their choices. Everyone's plate looked like something from a nice restaurant. And then Heather reached Jonathan's seat. She placed a wrapped sandwich in front of him. Prepackaged. The kind you might grab at a gas station when you're desperate. Turkey and cheese with wilted lettuce visible through the plastic. Next to it, a small bag of chips and a juice box. A juice box. Jonathan stared at the meal. Around him, the sounds of satisfied passengers cutting into salmon and chicken. The clink of real silverware on real plates. The murmur of appreciation. And in front of him, a sad, stale sandwich. He looked up at Heather. Excuse me, I think there might be a mistake. I should have the salmon option. I selected it when I checked in. Heather glanced down at him with an expression he'd seen too many times in his life. Condescension mixed with something harder. Something uglier. Some meals are reserved for priority passengers, she said, her voice low enough that others wouldn't easily hear but clear enough for him. People with higher status. The words hung in the air between them. Priority passengers. Higher status. Jonathan felt heat rise in his chest. He could have laughed at the absurdity. Him? Not high status? He had Diamond Elite status. He'd flown over 250,000 miles. He literally owned part of this airline. But more than that, and here's what really cut deep, he'd paid the same price for his ticket as everyone else in this cabin. He had just as much right to be here. Just as much right to salmon and champagne and respect. I have Diamond Elite status, Jonathan said calmly, though his hands were trembling slightly. I've been flying with Liberty for 6 years. Heather's smile was thin and cold. The system shows what it shows. Enjoy your meal, sir. And she walked away. Jonathan sat there, staring at his sandwich, while around him people enjoyed restaurant-quality food. His throat felt tight. His eyes stung. This wasn't about the salmon. He knew that. This was about something much, much bigger. Here's something most people don't realize about first-class cabins. They're not as private as the flight attendants think. There's a galley area, usually separated by a curtain or a small wall, where the crew prepares drinks and food. And sometimes, if you're sitting close enough, you can hear what they're saying. Jonathan was sitting close enough. He heard Heather's voice first, low and bitter. These people always think they belong up here. A male voice responded, Mark, the other flight attendant. Yeah, probably got lucky with a promo ticket or something. You know how it is. They should be grateful they're even on the plane, Heather continued. I don't know why they bother dressing up like that. Green suit. Like he's somebody important. They laughed. Both of them. A shared joke at his expense. Jonathan's hands clenched into fists. He stared straight ahead, his jaw tight. These people. Those two words told him everything. Not this passenger. Not that man in 2A. These people. Like he was part of some category. Some group that didn't deserve respect or dignity or salmon or champagne. He knew exactly what they meant. And something inside him, something that had been patient and understanding and willing to give benefit of the doubt, finally cracked. Jonathan pressed the call button above his seat. The little light dinged on. He waited. And waited. The businessman in 1A had pressed his call button earlier to ask for extra napkins. Heather had appeared within 30 seconds, all smiles. Jonathan waited 3 full minutes before she finally appeared, her expression already annoyed. Yes. Not, how can I help you? Not, what do you need? Just, yes. I'd like to speak with the captain, Jonathan said quietly. Heather's eyebrows rose. The captain is busy flying the plane, sir. Then I'd like to file a formal complaint about my treatment on this flight. Her expression hardened. Sir, I don't know what you think is happening, but I'm going to need you to calm down. I am calm, Jonathan said. And he was. Remarkably calm. The kind of calm that comes right before a storm. I'm simply asking to speak with someone about the service I've received. Sir, if you continue to cause a disturbance. A disturbance? Jonathan's voice rose slightly now. I've been sitting here quietly. I haven't raised my voice. I haven't done anything except ask for the service I paid for. Other passengers were starting to notice now. Heads turning. Conversation stopping. Sir, I need you to lower your voice right now, Heather said, her tone sharp. I need you to treat me with the same respect you've shown every other passenger in this cabin, Jonathan replied. And that's when everything exploded. 5 minutes later, the cockpit door opened. Captain Robert Hayes emerged, his uniform crisp, his expression stern. He was a large man, imposing, with gray hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention. He walked straight to Jonathan's seat. Sir, I'm Captain Hayes. I understand you're causing problems on my aircraft. Jonathan looked up at him, his heart pounding but his voice steady. I'm not causing problems, Captain. I'm asking to be treated fairly. My crew tells me you've been aggressive and disruptive. That's not true. Are you calling my crew liars? The captain's voice was loud now. Loud enough for everyone to hear. Jonathan felt every eye in first class on him. Judging. Assuming. The businessman in 1A frowned at him. The woman in pearls looked uncomfortable, like she wished this scene would just disappear. Captain, I've simply asked for the meal I ordered and the service I paid for. I've been given a sandwich while everyone else received full meals. I was denied the drink I pre-ordered, and I've been treated disrespectfully by your staff. Sir, I'm going to ask you one time to settle down and stop harassing my crew, or we're going to have a serious problem. Captain, this aircraft is under my command, and I will not tolerate passengers who threaten the safety and comfort of others. Safety and comfort? Jonathan hadn't threatened anyone. He'd barely raised his voice. But he could see it in the captain's eyes. The decision was already made. We're making an emergency landing in Dallas, Captain Hayes announced, loud enough for the whole cabin to hear. This passenger will be removed from the aircraft. Gasps rippled through first class. Jonathan felt his world tilting. An emergency landing? Removed from the aircraft? For what? For asking why he got a sandwich instead of salmon? For wanting to be treated like a human being? The captain returned to the cockpit. Around Jonathan, passengers whispered. He could feel their stares like weights on his skin. The businessman shook his head. The woman in pearls looked away quickly when he met her eyes. They all thought he was the problem. Heather stood near the galley, arms crossed, a small, satisfied smile on her face. Jonathan sat in his seat as the plane began its descent toward Dallas. His hands trembled, not with fear, but with something else. Anger, yes. Humiliation, definitely. But also determination. He pulled out his phone. The flight was equipped with Wi-Fi, one of those upgrades he'd helped approve during a board meeting, actually. Funny how things work out. His fingers moved across the screen, typing quickly. First text, to Melissa Parker, his executive assistant. Melissa, I need you to do something for me. Contact Dana Lopez at Liberty Airlines HR immediately. Tell her I need her in Dallas. Emergency. I'll explain when she gets there. Send. Second text, directly to Dana Lopez. They'd met several times during board meetings. She knew exactly who he was. Dana, it's Jonathan Reed. I'm on flight 228, about to make an emergency landing in Dallas. I need you there with the executive team. Access the surveillance feed from this flight. Cabin cameras, audio, everything. I'm invoking my authority as a partner. This needs to be handled now. Send. You see, here's something most passengers don't know. After a series of safety concerns and theft issues, Jonathan had personally approved the installation of surveillance systems throughout Liberty Airlines' fleet. Audio and video in every cabin, every galley. For security purposes. For protection. For evidence. He'd never imagined he'd need it for something like this. But those cameras had been recording everything. Every cold interaction. Every whispered insult. Every moment of discrimination. Everything. Jonathan sat back in his seat, his green suit jacket smooth and perfect despite everything that had happened. Around him, passengers still whispered and stared. Heather and Mark stood near the galley, probably celebrating their victory. The plane descended through clouds toward Dallas, and Jonathan Reed sat quietly waiting. They thought this was over. They thought they'd won. They thought they'd put him in his place. They had no idea what was coming. The plane touched down with a slight bump. Passengers craned their necks, confused about why they were landing in Dallas when this was supposed to be a direct flight to Los Angeles. Captain Hayes's voice crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we've made an unscheduled stop in Dallas due to a passenger disturbance. Please remain seated while we handle the situation. We apologize for the inconvenience. A passenger disturbance. That's what they were calling it. Jonathan felt a dozen pairs of eyes on him. Some angry. Some curious. Some pitying. The plane taxied to a remote gate. Through the window, Jonathan could see several vehicles approaching. Airport security. Ground crew. And something else. Several black SUVs. Official looking. Heather appeared at his seat, her smile victorious. Sir, you'll need to gather your belongings. Security will be escorting you off the plane. Jonathan looked up at her. We'll see about that. Her smile faltered slightly. Something in his tone, calm, confident, knowing, made her hesitate. The aircraft door opened. Footsteps echoed through the jetway. Everyone expected airport security to board. Everyone expected Jonathan to be led away in handcuffs, humiliated in front of all these witnesses. But what happened next? Nobody, and I mean nobody, saw this coming. What they didn't know was that Jonathan Reed wasn't just any passenger. And he was about to remind them of that. Coming up in Chapter 2, the secret revealed. You won't believe what happens next. You know that feeling when you're watching a movie, and you just know something big is about to happen? That electricity in the air? That moment right before everything changes? That's exactly what the passengers on Flight 228 were feeling as they sat there on that Dallas tarmac, watching the aircraft door open, waiting to see Jonathan Reed, the man in the green suit, get dragged off the plane in handcuffs. But life, my friends, has a funny way of flipping the script when you least expect it. Let me tell you what happened next. The aircraft door was open. Footsteps echoed from the jetway. Heavy, purposeful footsteps. Multiple people. Heather Collins stood near the front of the cabin, arms crossed, that satisfied smile still on her face. Mark Daniels, the other flight attendant, lingered near the galley. Captain Hayes had emerged from the cockpit again, standing tall and authoritative, ready to witness this passenger's removal. They were all waiting for the same thing: airport security to board, take Jonathan away, and let them get on with their day. Jonathan sat perfectly still in seat 2A. His emerald green suit was unwrinkled. His hands were folded calmly in his lap. But if you looked closely, really closely, you might have seen the slightest hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. He'd sent those texts 15 minutes ago. Dallas was only a 45-minute flight from Atlanta. Dana Lopez had been in the Atlanta office when he texted her. If she'd moved fast, and he knew Dana, she always moved fast, she could have made it. The footsteps grew louder. The businessman in 1A muttered, finally. Some people just don't know how to behave. The woman in pearls shook her head sadly. Such a shame. He seemed so well dressed. Another passenger whispered. I knew something was off about him. Jonathan heard it all. Every judgmental word. Every assumption. Every rush to condemn him without knowing the full story. He didn't say anything. He just waited. And then they appeared in the doorway. The first person to board the aircraft wasn't airport security. It was a woman in a sharp navy suit, her heels clicking authoritatively against the aircraft floor. She was African American, about 50, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in an elegant bun. Her expression was serious, professional, and absolutely furious. Behind her came 3 men in business suits. Then 2 more women with tablets and briefcases. All of them looked official. Important. Powerful. Heather's smile faded. Excuse me, who are? Dana Lopez, the woman said crisply, holding up an ID badge. Senior Vice President of Human Resources, Liberty Airlines. And these are members of our executive team and legal counsel. The color drained from Heather's face. Captain Hayes stepped forward, clearly confused. Ms. Lopez, I wasn't informed you'd be. Captain Hayes, Dana interrupted, her voice cold as ice. We need to speak with you, Flight Attendant Collins and Flight Attendant Daniels immediately. Everyone else, please remain seated. The cabin fell silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Passengers exchanged confused glances. This wasn't what was supposed to happen. Where was airport security? Why were airline executives here? What was going on? Dana's eyes swept the cabin until they found Jonathan. For just a moment, just a flash, their eyes met. She gave him the smallest nod. A nod that said, I got your message. We're here. And we're about to fix this. Jonathan nodded back. Heather looked between Dana and Jonathan, her confidence crumbling. I don't understand. We called for this passenger to be removed because... Because of what, Ms. Collins? Dana's voice could cut glass. Please enlighten me. Enlighten all of us. One of the men with Dana, a young guy with glasses and a tablet, stepped forward. Ms. Lopez, I've pulled up the surveillance footage from Flight 228 as requested. Audio and video. Everything from boarding through present moment. Captain Hayes's face went pale. Surveillance footage? Yes, Captain, Dana said. You may recall that 18 months ago, the board approved the installation of comprehensive security systems on all aircraft. Audio and visual recording in all cabins and crew areas. For safety and security purposes. The system has been operational for 14 months. Heather's hands started to shake. Mark looked like he might be sick. Now, Dana continued, her voice carrying through the cabin so every passenger could hear, let's review what actually happened on this flight, shall we? The young man with the tablet tapped the screen. Then he turned it around so everyone could see. And there it was. Crystal clear video. The footage showed Heather greeting passengers as they boarded. Warm smiles, friendly words, champagne offered to each person. And then Jonathan appeared on screen in his green suit, taking his seat. The contrast was stunning. The smile disappeared from Heather's face. The warmth vanished. Her greeting was cold, clipped. No champagne offered. Keep watching, Dana said. The video continued. Drink service. Champagne and crystal flutes for everyone. Then Heather approaching Jonathan with a plastic cup of orange juice. Jonathan politely asking for his pre-ordered Macallan 18. Heather lying, yes lying, about it not being in the system. The camera angle shifted to show the bar behind her, the bottle of Macallan clearly visible untouched. Gasps rippled through the cabin. But Dana wasn't done. Now let's hear what was said in the galley. Audio is excellent on these systems. She nodded to the young man, who tapped again. And then, through the tablet speaker, crystal clear. Heather's voice. These people always think they belong up here. Mark's voice. Yeah, probably got lucky with a promo ticket or something. Heather again. They should be grateful they're even on the plane. I don't know why they bother dressing up like that. Green suit. Like he's somebody important. Laughter. Cruel, dismissive laughter. The cabin erupted. Not in anger at Jonathan this time. In shock. In horror. In sudden, terrible understanding. The businessman in 1A looked mortified. The woman in pearls had tears in her eyes. Other passengers started talking all at once, some apologizing toward Jonathan, others expressing their outrage. Heather was crying now. That's not, we didn't mean, it's out of context. Out of context? Dana's voice was ice. Please, Miss Collins, provide the context that makes those words acceptable. Silence. Mark tried to speak. Ma'am, we were just what, Mr. Daniels? Just being discriminatory? Just providing different levels of service based on the color of a passenger's skin? Just mocking a paying customer behind his back? Dana turned to address the entire cabin now, her voice ringing with authority and righteous anger. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to apologize on behalf of Liberty Airlines. What happened on this flight is inexcusable, unacceptable, and absolutely against everything our company stands for. The treatment this passenger received was discriminatory, unprofessional, and wrong. She looked back at Heather, Mark, and Captain Hayes. Her expression was hard as stone. Captain Robert Hayes, you are relieved of your command, effective immediately. The captain's mouth opened and closed like a fish. You can't. I absolutely can. You made an unnecessary emergency diversion based on a fabricated disturbance. You falsely accused a passenger. And you failed in your duty to ensure all passengers are treated with respect and dignity. She turned to the flight attendants. Heather Collins and Mark Daniels, you are terminated from Liberty Airlines, effective immediately. No! Heather's voice was shrill now. You can't fire me. I have union protection. I have rights. You have the right to treat passengers equally, Dana shot back. You chose to violate that right. Your employment is terminated. Security will escort you off this aircraft. You are not to return to any Liberty Airlines facility. You will receive formal termination letters within 48 hours. The cabin was absolutely silent now. Everyone watching. Everyone processing. And then Dana did something that would become legendary in airline history. She walked over to Jonathan's seat. Dana stood in the aisle beside seat 2A and extended her hand to Jonathan. He took it, standing up, his green suit catching the cabin lights just like it had that morning in Atlanta, though now it meant something different. Now it was a symbol of dignity in the face of injustice. Ladies and gentlemen, Dana said, still holding Jonathan's hand, allow me to properly introduce your fellow passenger. This is Jonathan Reed, CEO of Reed Tech Innovations, Diamond Elite member for 6 years, over 250,000 miles flown with Liberty Airlines. She paused, letting that sink in. And, she continued, Jonathan Reed is also a silent partner and partial owner of Liberty Airlines. The cabin exploded. Passengers gasped. Some shouted in surprise. The businessman in 1A looked like he'd been slapped. The woman in pearls covered her mouth with both hands. Heather's legs actually buckled. She grabbed the nearest seat to keep from falling. Mark had gone completely white. Captain Hayes? He looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. That's right, Dana continued. The man you discriminated against, mocked, denied service to, and tried to have removed from this aircraft. He owns part of this airline. But even if he didn't, even if he was just a regular passenger, what happened here would be equally wrong. Equally unacceptable. Jonathan finally spoke, his voice calm but carrying through the cabin. I didn't tell you who I was because I wanted to see how Liberty Airlines really treats its passengers when no one's watching, when there's no one important to impress. I wanted to know if our values were real or just words on a website. He looked at Heather, then at Mark, then at Captain Hayes. There was no triumph in his expression, just sadness, deep, weary sadness. I've had Diamond Elite status for 6 years, he said quietly. 6 years of flying first class, and not once, not one single time, have I been treated the way I was treated today. Do you know what that tells me? It tells me this isn't a problem with systems or procedures or training. It's a problem with how you see people, how you judge who belongs and who doesn't based on nothing but the color of their skin. The cabin was silent except for the sound of Heather crying. Jonathan turned to address all the passengers now. I'm not just upset for myself. I'm upset for every person who's experienced this and didn't have the power to speak up. Every person who was treated poorly and just accepted it because they thought they had no choice. Every person who was made to feel less than human and had to sit there and take it. His voice grew stronger, more passionate. Discrimination doesn't just hurt one person. It poisons everything. It makes all of us less than we could be. Jonathan reached for the intercom handset. Dana nodded her approval. Ladies and gentlemen, Jonathan said, his voice now broadcasting through the entire aircraft, my name is Jonathan Reed, and I want to make something very clear. What happened today is not your fault. You were passengers on a flight, just trying to get where you needed to go. Some of you made assumptions about me when the captain said I was causing a disturbance. That's human nature. We all make judgments sometimes. He took a breath. But I want you to remember this moment. Remember how quickly you believed I was the problem. Remember how easily the narrative was shaped against me. And next time you see someone being treated unfairly, I hope you'll think twice. I hope you'll speak up. I hope you'll be on the side of what's right, not what's convenient. Passengers nodded. Several were crying now. The businessman in 1A was openly weeping. And now, Jonathan continued, I want to do something. Something to acknowledge that your time was wasted today. That you were caught in the middle of something that never should have happened. Something to show that Liberty Airlines is serious about making this right. He looked at Dana. She nodded again, a small smile on her face. They discussed this in frantic texts while waiting for the plane to land. Every person on this flight, every single person, will receive a full refund for their ticket. Economy, premium economy, business class, first class. Everyone. Full refund. The cabin stirred. People looked at each other in surprise. Additionally, Jonathan continued, every passenger will receive a $10,000 compensation payment for this experience and for being witness to discrimination. That money will be in your accounts within 1 week. Now people were really reacting. Excited murmurs. Shocked laughter. Disbelief. And finally, Jonathan said, his voice warm now, almost joyful, every passenger on Flight 228 will receive 5 years of complimentary elite status with Liberty Airlines. Top-tier benefits. Because you shouldn't have had to see what you saw today. And because I want you to experience how you should have been treated all along. The cabin erupted in applause. Real, genuine, thunderous applause. People stood up. They cheered. They clapped until their hands were sore. An elderly black woman from economy class, she'd been allowed to come forward to witness what was happening, walked up to Jonathan with tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she said, embracing him. Thank you for standing up. Thank you for not accepting it. My husband and I, we've been treated this way so many times. Told we don't belong. Made to feel small. Thank you for having the courage to say enough is enough. Jonathan hugged her back, his own eyes wet. We all deserve better, he said softly. All of us. Other passengers came forward. The businessman from 1A apologized profusely, ashamed of his earlier judgment. A young mother with 2 small children thanked him for teaching them to stand up for what's right. A white man in his 60s shook Jonathan's hand and said, I'm ashamed I didn't speak up earlier. I saw how she treated you. I stayed silent. That changes today. It was a moment of collective recognition, collective reckoning, collective healing. While passengers celebrated and processed and reflected, Dana turned back to the fired crew members. Captain Hayes, Ms. Collins, Mr. Daniels, gather your personal belongings. You have 5 minutes. Security will escort you off this aircraft and out of the airport. You are banned from all Liberty Airlines property indefinitely. Airport security had indeed arrived. Not for Jonathan, but for them. Heather was still crying, mascara running down her face. This is cancel culture. I'm being canceled for nothing. I have a family to support. You're ruining my life. Dana's expression didn't soften. You ruined your own life, Ms. Collins, the moment you decided that some passengers deserve respect and others don't. The moment you let prejudice guide your actions. The moment you mock someone for the color of their skin. Those were your choices. These are the consequences. Mark tried a different approach. Sir, he said to Jonathan, I'm sorry. I truly am. I didn't mean anything by it. It was just talk. You know how people talk. Jonathan looked at him for a long moment. Yes, I do know how people talk. I've heard it my whole life. The just talk that makes people feel worthless. The just talk that tells them they don't belong. The just talk that keeps systems of discrimination alive and thriving. He shook his head. Your apology is noted, but it doesn't undo the harm. It doesn't erase what you said, and it doesn't mean you deserve to keep your job. Captain Hayes said nothing. He just gathered his things from the cockpit, his movements stiff and mechanical. His career, decades of flying, was over. One flight, one bad decision, one moment of choosing prejudice over justice. And it had cost him everything. Security escorted all three of them off the aircraft. Passengers watched in silence as they walked that long, humiliating walk down the aisle and out the door. The applause that followed their exit was different from the earlier celebration. This was applause of relief, of justice being served, of a moment when accountability actually happened. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dana announced, "we need to get a new crew up here to complete your journey to Los Angeles. They're on their way now. We expect about a 45-minute delay. Liberty Airlines will provide meal vouchers for the terminal, and of course, all these delays are covered under your compensation package." But nobody moved to leave the plane. They wanted to stay, to talk, to process, to be part of this historic moment. A new captain arrived, Captain Jennifer Martinez, a Latina woman with 20 years' experience and a warm smile. She introduced herself to Jonathan first, shaking his hand firmly. "Mr. Reed, it's an honor to complete this flight for you. I promise you and all our passengers that the remainder of this journey will reflect the values Liberty Airlines truly stands for." New flight attendants arrived too. A diverse crew, different backgrounds, different ages, but all carrying themselves with genuine warmth and professionalism. Laura Bennett, the new lead flight attendant, approached Jonathan with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Reed, what you did today, you don't know how many of us have witnessed things like this. How many times we've wanted to speak up, but felt powerless. You just changed everything for us. Thank you." Jonathan smiled. "Thank you for being who you are, for choosing this work, for treating people with dignity." As the new crew prepared the cabin for departure, something beautiful happened. Passengers from economy class came forward. The dividing curtain had been pulled back, and they started sharing their own stories with Jonathan. A young black college student told him about being questioned repeatedly about whether he'd really purchased his ticket. An Asian American businessman shared how he was constantly mistaken for another Asian passenger, despite looking nothing like him. A Latina teacher described being told her English was surprisingly good by a flight attendant, even though she'd been born in Texas and English was her first language. Story after story, experience after experience, a lifetime of small cuts and large wounds. And Jonathan listened to every single one. 45 minutes later, Flight 228 was ready to continue to Los Angeles. The new crew was efficient, warm, professional. Everyone received the same level of service. Same smiles. Same champagne. Same respect. Jonathan was offered his Macallan 18. In a proper glass. With ice if he wanted it. He accepted it with a smile. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Dana Lopez took a seat next to him. She decided to fly to Los Angeles with them, to ensure everything went smoothly. "Jonathan," she said quietly, "what you did today was brave. Important. But it's also just the beginning. This incident exposed something systemic. Something we need to fix throughout the entire airline." Jonathan nodded. "I know. That's why I'm calling an emergency board meeting for next week. We need real reforms. Not just empty promises. Real, structural changes. What are you thinking? Mandatory anti-bias training for every employee. A diversity review council to handle complaints independently. Transparency reports every quarter showing our progress. And most importantly," he paused, his expression serious, "we need to make sure every employee knows that discrimination will not be tolerated. Not a little bit. Not as just talk. Not ever." Dana smiled. "You know there will be pushback from some board members. They'll say it's too expensive. Too complicated. Too much change too fast." Jonathan's eyes hardened. "Then they can explain to shareholders why we're losing passengers to our competitors. They can explain why talented employees don't want to work for us. They can explain why we're on the wrong side of history." He took a sip of his whiskey. "Fairness isn't expensive, Dana. Discrimination is." She nodded. "I'll support you completely. Whatever you need." The plane lifted off, climbing into the sky. Through the window, Dallas disappeared below them, getting smaller and smaller. Jonathan leaned back in his seat, feeling the weight of the day settling on his shoulders. He was exhausted, emotionally drained, but also hopeful. For the first time in hours, genuinely hopeful. Because sometimes, just sometimes, standing up actually works. Speaking out actually matters. Refusing to accept injustice actually changes things. Around him, Passengers settled in for the remainder of the flight. But they weren't the same passengers who'd boarded in Atlanta. They'd been changed by what they witnessed. Changed by being part of a moment when accountability happened in real time. When justice wasn't just an ideal but an action. The young man who'd helped Dana with the surveillance footage approached Jonathan's seat. "Mr. Reed? I just wanted to say, I'm the one who installed these camera systems. When we were implementing them, I honestly thought they'd mostly catch petty theft or help resolve disputes about lost luggage. I never imagined." He trailed off, emotion choking his voice. "Never imagined they'd catch discrimination?" Jonathan finished gently. The young man nodded. "But I'm glad they did. I'm glad we had evidence. I'm glad we could prove what happened so nobody could deny it or explain it away." "What's your name?" Jonathan asked. "Marcus. Marcus Chun." "Marcus, thank you for your work. Those cameras didn't just protect me today. They'll protect thousands of passengers in the future. Never underestimate the importance of systems that hold people accountable." Marcus smiled and returned to his seat. The rest of the flight was peaceful. More than peaceful, it was actually enjoyable. The way flying should be. Laura and the new crew were attentive without being intrusive. They treated everyone, with respect and care. The meals were good. The service was excellent. And every passenger seemed lighter somehow, as if they'd collectively shed some heavy weight. As Los Angeles came into view, the sprawl of the city, the mountains, the ocean glinting in the late afternoon sun, Jonathan felt his phone buzz. Messages flooding in. From Melissa, his assistant. "Mr. Reed, the story is already going viral. Someone on the flight posted to social media. You're trending on Twitter. Multiple news outlets requesting interviews." From his business partner. "Just heard what happened. Are you okay? Also, can I just say, that was the most boss move I've ever witnessed." From his mother. "Jonathan, baby, I just saw the news. I'm so proud of you. So proud. But also, are you okay? Call me when you land." Jonathan smiled. He'd call his mother first thing. She'd been the one who taught him to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. Even when it costs something. Especially then. The plane touched down in Los Angeles smoothly. Perfect landing. As they taxied to the gate, Captain Martinez's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Los Angeles. On behalf of the entire crew, thank you for your patience today during our unexpected stop. But more importantly, thank you for being witnesses. Thank you for being part of something important. Thank you for reminding us all that we can do better. That we must do better." She paused. "And Mr. Reed, thank you for your courage. You've made all of us better today." The cabin erupted in one final round of applause. As passengers filed off the aircraft, something unprecedented happened. One by one, they stopped at Jonathan's seat, shook his hand, hugged him, thanked him. The elderly black couple from economy. "You gave us hope." The young mother with her children. "My kids will remember this day forever." The businessman from 1A. "I'm ashamed of how quickly I judged you. Thank you for teaching me better." The college student. "You're a hero, man. Seriously." It took almost 30 minutes for everyone to deplane, because they all wanted a moment with him. Wanted to acknowledge what had happened. Wanted to be part of the story they'd tell for years to come. Finally, the plane was empty except for Jonathan, Dana, and the crew. Laura Bennett approached him one last time. "Mr. Reed, the entire crew wanted to give you this." She handed him an envelope. Inside was a handwritten note signed by every crew member on the new team. "Mr. Reed, thank you for what you did today. Not just for yourself, but for all of us. Because of you, we're proud to wear this uniform again. Because of you, we believe Liberty Airlines can truly live up to its name. Because of you, we know that speaking up matters. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for your grace. Thank you for showing us what leadership really looks like." Jonathan's vision blurred with tears. He stood and hugged Laura, then shook hands with every crew member. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for being the kind of people who make this job worth doing. Thank you for treating people with dignity. Thank you for being the change." As he finally walked off the aircraft, his green suit still perfect despite everything, Dana walked beside him. "So," she said with a small smile, "ready for that board meeting?" Jonathan laughed. Actually laughed. After everything, the humiliation, the confrontation, the emotional roller coaster, he could still laugh. "Oh, I'm ready," he said. "More than ready. Because this isn't over, Dana. What happened today on Flight 228? That was just the beginning." They walked through the jetway together into LAX, where Jonathan's life was about to get very, very complicated and very, very public. But that's a story for the next chapter. Jonathan has exposed the discrimination and won this battle. But the real war is just beginning. In Chapter 3, we'll see how one man's courage transformed an entire industry, and whether the changes he fought for would actually last. The revolution was about to begin. They say it takes years to build a reputation and only moments to destroy it. But what about the opposite? What about those rare moments when one person's courage builds something new? Something better? Something that changes everything? This is the story of what happened after Flight 228. After the confrontation. After the justice. This is the story of how one man in a green suit sparked a revolution at 30,000 feet, and whether that revolution would survive in the real world. Because here's the thing about standing up. It's one thing to win the battle. It's another thing entirely to win the war. Let me tell you how Jonathan Reed changed not just one airline, but an entire industry. Within 3 hours of Flight 228 landing in Los Angeles, the story had exploded across the internet. Someone on that flight, probably the college student Marcus had mentioned, had posted the whole thing on social media. Every detail. The discrimination. The surveillance footage. The firing. The compensation. The whole incredible story. And the internet did what the internet does. It went absolutely wild. Hashtag Man in Green Suit was trending worldwide within 4 hours. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, everyone was talking about it. People were sharing their own stories of discrimination on airlines. Flight attendants were coming forward with accounts of racist policies they'd witnessed. Passengers were posting videos of similar treatment. It was like Jonathan had lifted a rock, and suddenly everyone could see what had been crawling underneath. The major news networks picked it up by that evening. CNN, NBC, Fox News, BBC, all of them running the story. Some called Jonathan a hero. Others questioned whether the response was too harsh. A few talking heads tried to defend Heather Collins, saying she was being canceled unfairly. But then Liberty Airlines released the surveillance footage. And once people saw it, once they heard Heather's words in her own voice, saw the deliberate mistreatment, witnessed the lies, the debate was over. This wasn't about cancel culture or overreaction. This was about documented, undeniable discrimination. Jonathan's phone didn't stop ringing for 3 days straight. Interview requests, speaking invitations, book deals, movie offers. Everyone wanted a piece of the story. But Jonathan wasn't interested in being famous. He had something else in mind. Something bigger. 1 week after Flight 228, Jonathan sat in Liberty Airlines corporate headquarters in Atlanta. The building was all glass and steel, modern and impressive, with the company motto etched above the entrance. Freedom and dignity for every traveler. Those words felt different now. Heavier. More like a promise that needed to be kept rather than just nice marketing. Dana Lopez sat across from him in a conference room, surrounded by stacks of files, her laptop open, her expression grim. "Jonathan, you need to see this," she said, sliding a thick folder across the table. He opened it. Page after page of complaints. Customer reports. Internal memos. Going back years. "We've been going through our complaint system," Dana explained. "Looking for patterns. And what we found." She paused, her voice tight with anger. "It's worse than we thought." Jonathan read through the documents, his jaw clenching tighter with each page. A black businessman reported being asked 3 times to prove he'd actually purchased his first-class ticket. The complaint was marked, resolved, miscommunication. A Latina doctor described being told she should move to economy because first class was reserved for English speakers. The response: staff has been reminded of company policy. A Muslim family complained that a flight attendant asked other passengers if they felt comfortable flying with them. The file noted, attendant received verbal warning. Verbal warnings. Reminders. Miscommunications. No real consequences. No real change. And then Jonathan saw Heather Collins's personnel file. 16 complaints. 16 separate passengers had reported discriminatory treatment from her over the past 4 years. 16 times, Liberty Airlines had done essentially nothing. Why wasn't she fired before? Jonathan's voice was quiet, dangerous. Dana rubbed her temples. Because the complaints were always handled individually. Different supervisors, different regions. Nobody connected the dots. And honestly, I think some supervisors didn't want to connect them. Easier to call each incident isolated than admit we had a systemic problem. Systemic, Jonathan repeated. That's exactly what this is. He kept reading. More names. More complaints. More patterns of discrimination that had been swept under the rug, explained away, minimized. Over 60 documented cases in the past 2 years alone. And those were just the ones where people had bothered to complain. How many more had simply accepted it? How many had suffered in silence? Jonathan closed the folder and looked at Dana. We're calling an emergency board meeting. Tomorrow. Tomorrow? Dana's eyebrows rose. Jonathan, some board members are overseas. It takes time to. Tomorrow, he repeated firmly. Virtual if they have to join remotely. But this happens tomorrow. Because every day we wait is another day someone might experience what I experienced. And I won't let that happen. Not anymore. Dana nodded slowly. All right. Tomorrow. But Jonathan, be prepared. Some of the board members won't be happy about this. They'll push back on costs, on PR concerns, on moving too fast. They'll want to wait, study it more, form a committee. Jonathan's expression was steel. Then they'll hear me explain exactly why waiting is no longer an option. The Liberty Airlines boardroom the next day was tense. 12 board members sat around the massive mahogany table, some in person, others appearing on large screens via video conference. They were a mix of ages, backgrounds, and perspectives, old money and new, industry veterans and fresh investors. And all of them knew this meeting was going to be explosive. Jonathan stood at the head of the table, wearing, yes, another suit. This one was deep navy blue, professional and authoritative. But those who'd been following the story noticed the green pocket square, a small reminder of where this all began. Thank you all for making time on short notice, Jonathan began. I know this is unusual, but what happened on Flight 2288 days ago was also unusual, and it revealed something we can no longer ignore. He clicked a remote, and the screen behind him lit up with data. Charts. Graphs. Numbers that told a devastating story. In the past 2 years, Liberty Airlines has received over 60 documented complaints of racial discrimination. 60. That's one complaint every 12 days. And those are only the ones where passengers actually filed formal complaints. Research shows that for every complaint filed, there are approximately 10 similar incidents that go unreported. He let that sink in. That means we could be looking at over 600 incidents of discrimination in just 2 years. One of the older board members, Gerald Hartman, old money, traditional thinking, interrupted. Now, Jonathan, let's not jump to conclusions. Some people are just overly sensitive. Some complaints might be exaggerated or... I was one of those complaints, Gerald, Jonathan said quietly. Was I being overly sensitive when I was given a sandwich while others ate salmon? When I was mocked by staff for the color of my skin? When I was threatened with removal for asking to be treated fairly? Gerald went silent. Jonathan continued. I've reviewed every single complaint in detail. The patterns are undeniable. Black passengers questioned about ticket authenticity at rates 400% higher than white passengers. Latino passengers receiving language-based discrimination. Muslim passengers facing safety concerns that are nothing more than profiling. Asian passengers being confused for each other despite looking nothing alike. It's not sensitivity. It's documented, systematic discrimination. Another board member, Susan Chun, leaned forward. What are you proposing? Jonathan clicked to the next slide. Complete systemic reform. I'm calling it the Liberty Airlines Equality Initiative. For major components. He outlined each one. First, mandatory anti-bias training for every employee. Not a 1-hour video they can ignore. Real, comprehensive training developed with civil rights experts. Every employee, from baggage handlers to pilots to executives. No exceptions. With regular refresher courses and accountability measures. Second, creation of an independent diversity review council. Passenger complaints about discrimination will be reviewed by this council, not by the departments where the discrimination occurred. Real oversight. Real consequences. Third, expansion of our surveillance and documentation systems. What saved me was having evidence. Other passengers deserve that same protection. Every aircraft, every gate area, comprehensive documentation. Fourth, quarterly public transparency reports. We publish our complaint numbers, our response times, our disciplinary actions. Complete transparency. If we're serious about fixing this, we need to be willing to show our work. The room was silent for a moment. Then the pushback began. The costs would be enormous, said Gerald. We're talking millions in training alone. Plus the technology upgrades, the oversight council salaries, the settlements will cost more, Jonathan interrupted. Every lawsuit from discriminated passengers. Every PR disaster. Every customer we lose to competitors who handle this better. Every talented employee who refuses to work for an airline with a discrimination problem. Calculate those costs, Gerald. Another board member, Robert Kim, chimed in. But moving this fast, shouldn't we study it more? Form a committee? Get external consultants, too. We've studied enough, Jonathan said, his voice rising. We've had committees. We've had consultants. What we haven't had is action. Real, meaningful action. And I'm not willing to wait any longer while passengers continue to be treated the way I was treated. He took a breath, composing himself. Let me tell you something. When I boarded that flight in my green suit, I thought I was just going to Los Angeles. I thought I'd work on my laptop, maybe watch a movie, have a nice meal. Instead, I was humiliated, mocked, threatened, made to feel like I didn't belong. And you know what the worst part was? It wasn't even surprising, because I've felt that way before. We all have. Anyone who doesn't fit someone's narrow definition of who belongs in first class or in boardrooms or in any space we've earned the right to occupy. His voice grew stronger, more passionate. But here's what I realized sitting in that seat, eating that terrible sandwich while everyone around me enjoyed their meals. I had power. Not just because I'm a CEO or because I own part of this airline, but because I had a choice. I could accept it quietly, or I could stand up. And I chose to stand up. He looked around the table, meeting each board member's eyes. Now you all have that same choice. We can continue business as usual, treating discrimination complaints as isolated incidents, doing the bare minimum, hoping nobody notices. Or we can stand up. We can be the airline that actually lives up to its name. We can choose freedom and dignity for every traveler, not just the ones who look a certain way. Jonathan clicked to his final slide. Just 2 words. Fairness isn't expensive. Discrimination is. That's my proposal, he said. That's what I'm asking you to support. Not because it's easy. Not because it's cheap. But because it's right. And because being on the wrong side of history is the most expensive thing of all. The discussion that followed was intense. Heated. Some board members immediately supported Jonathan. Others raised concerns about implementation timelines, costs, PR risks. Gerald Hartman was particularly resistant. This feels like an overreaction to one incident. Yes, what happened to you is wrong, Jonathan. Nobody disputes that. But completely overhauling our entire system because of one bad employee. 16 complaints, Gerald, Dana interjected. Heather Collins alone had 16 complaints. And she was never fired until there was video evidence, so clear it couldn't be denied. And what about the other 59 complaints? Susan Chen added. Were all of those one bad employee too? The debate continued for over an hour. But slowly the momentum shifted. One by one, board members who'd been skeptical began to see the bigger picture. Began to understand that this wasn't about political correctness or overreaction. It was about basic human dignity. Finally, it was time to vote. All in favor of the Liberty Airlines Equality Initiative as proposed? Hands rose around the table. Video conference participants indicated their votes. When the count was finished, the result was clear. 12 votes in favor, 2 against. Gerald and Robert had voted no. But they were outnumbered. Jonathan felt something release in his chest. Relief. Hope. Validation. The motion passes, he said quietly. We begin implementation immediately. As the meeting adjourned, several board members came up to shake his hand. Susan Chen hugged him. My daughter showed me the video from the flight, she said, tears in her eyes. She's 13. She said, "Mom, I want to work for a company like that when I grow up. A company that actually fixes things. Thank you for giving us something to be proud of." Even Gerald approached him as he was leaving. "Jonathan, I still think you're moving too fast." "But," he paused, looking uncomfortable. "My grandson is biracial. He's 6 years old. And when I think about him flying on our airline someday, I want him to be safe, to be respected. So maybe moving fast is exactly what we need." Jonathan shook his hand. "Thank you, Gerald." The next 3 months were a whirlwind. Liberty Airlines hired Dr. Patricia Williams, a renowned civil rights educator, to develop the anti-bias training program. It wasn't a quick video. It was a comprehensive, multi-day program that forced employees to confront their own biases, to hear stories from passengers who'd experienced discrimination, to understand the real impact of their actions. Some employees embraced it. They'd witnessed discrimination themselves and were grateful someone was finally taking it seriously. They shared stories in the training sessions, times they'd wanted to speak up but felt powerless, times they'd seen passengers treated poorly and wished they could intervene. Other employees resisted. They complained about political correctness gone mad and having to walk on eggshells. A few even quit. Jonathan attended one of the training sessions himself, sitting in the back row with frontline employees. He listened as a flight attendant named Maria shared her story of being told by a supervisor that she needed to speak more American if she wanted to advance in her career, despite being born in Florida. He watched as a pilot named David, who was Muslim, described having to endure jokes from colleagues about whether he was allowed to fly planes. And he heard from passengers, real passengers who'd been invited to share their experiences. The humiliation, the anger, the resignation that this was just how things were. By the end of the session, several employees were in tears. Not because they felt attacked, but because they finally understood. Really understood. The Diversity Review Council was established with 7 members, diverse in race, gender, age, and background. They were given real authority to investigate complaints, mandate consequences, and require changes. Within the first month, they identified 3 employees who needed to be terminated for patterns of discrimination that had been previously overlooked. They also identified 12 employees who deserved commendations for going above and beyond to ensure all passengers felt welcome. The surveillance systems were upgraded on every aircraft. Clear signs informed passengers that audio and video recording was in effect for safety and security. Some privacy advocates raised concerns, but most passengers, especially those who'd experienced discrimination, felt safer knowing there would be evidence if something went wrong. And the transparency reports? Those were revolutionary. Every quarter, Liberty Airlines published detailed data. How many discrimination complaints were received, how they were handled, what disciplinary actions were taken, trends over time, areas of improvement and areas still needing work. The first report was painful to read. The numbers were bad, but Jonathan insisted on complete honesty. "We can't fix what we won't acknowledge," he said. What happened next surprised everyone, including Jonathan. Other airlines started paying attention. First, it was just quiet inquiries. Competitors calling Dana to ask about the training program. Industry conferences inviting Jonathan to speak. Aviation publications writing think pieces about the Reed reform model. Then 3 major airlines, Delta, United, and American, announced they were adopting similar programs. Not exactly the same, but clearly inspired by what Liberty had done. Mandatory bias training. Independent review councils. Transparency reports. The Federal Aviation Administration took notice too. They issued new guidelines recommending that all airlines implement comprehensive anti-discrimination programs. They cited Liberty Airlines as a model, specifically mentioning the Reed reform model in their official documentation. Flight attendant unions, initially skeptical, began advocating for similar protections for their members. They realized that good employees were being put in impossible positions when they had to choose between following discriminatory supervisors or standing up for what was right. Passengers started demanding better. Social media campaigns sprang up. #FlyFairly, #NoMoreExcuses, #EveryPassengerMatters. People shared their stories, their experiences, their demands for change. It became a movement, an actual, real movement for equality in air travel. And it all traced back to one man in a green suit who refused to accept injustice. But the real test was still to come. Remember Heather Collins? She didn't disappear quietly. 2 weeks after being fired, she appeared on a conservative news program, claiming she was the real victim. "I'm being destroyed by cancel culture," she said, tears streaming down her face. "One mistake, and my whole career is over. Where's the forgiveness? Where's the second chance?" She framed herself as a working mother just trying to do her job, unfairly targeted by a wealthy CEO with too much power. Some people bought it. Online commenters rallied to her defense. A GoFundMe was set up for her legal fees. But then Liberty Airlines did something brilliant. With permission from the legal team and Jonathan, they released the full surveillance footage publicly. Not edited. Not summarized. The complete video and audio from Flight 228. People watched it all. They saw every cold interaction. They heard every mocking comment. They witnessed every lie. And most importantly, they saw that this wasn't one mistake. It was a pattern of deliberate, calculated mistreatment. The GoFundMe was shut down for violating their terms of service. The supportive comments evaporated. Heather's narrative collapsed completely. She tried to sue Liberty Airlines for wrongful termination. The case was dismissed within 3 months. The evidence was simply too overwhelming. Captain Robert Hayes faced his own consequences. The FAA suspended his pilot's license for 6 months for making an unnecessary emergency diversion based on fabricated safety concerns. When he tried to return to flying after his suspension, no major airline would hire him. His career was effectively over. Mark Daniels, the other flight attendant, quietly disappeared from public view. Last anyone heard, he was working in retail in a small town in Tennessee. Were the consequences harsh? Maybe. But as Jonathan said in one interview, actions have consequences. They chose discrimination. These are the results of that choice. Jonathan Reed walked through Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport on a Tuesday morning, 6 months after that fateful flight. He was wearing his green suit again. The same one. It had been cleaned and pressed countless times since that day, but it was still his favorite. Still made him feel confident. Still turned heads. But now people recognized him. A gate agent smiled and said, "Mr. Reed, thank you for everything you've done." A pilot waiting at the coffee shop shook his hand. A young black girl, maybe 8 years old, tugged on her mother's sleeve and whispered loudly, "Mama, that's the man in the green suit." Jonathan smiled at her. She beamed back. He was taking Flight 228 again. Same route, Atlanta to Los Angeles. Same departure time. Same seat, 2A, first-class window. When he boarded, the atmosphere was completely different from 6 months ago. The lead flight attendant was Laura Bennett, the same woman who'd taken over the flight after the Dallas incident. She greeted him warmly, but professionally. "Mr. Reed, welcome aboard. It's wonderful to have you flying with us today." "Thank you, Laura. How have things been?" She smiled, and it was genuine. "Better. So much better. The training has made a real difference. And knowing that discrimination will be taken seriously, it's changed everything. We actually feel proud to wear this uniform now." As Jonathan settled into his seat, he observed the boarding process. Every passenger, every single one, received the same warm greeting. Same offers of champagne or juice. Same respect and dignity. A young Muslim woman in a hijab was welcomed with the same smile as the elderly white businessman. A Latino family with children received the same courtesy as the well-dressed couple in designer clothes. A passenger using a wheelchair was treated with genuine care and respect. This was how it was supposed to be all along. Before takeoff, Laura approached his seat with an envelope. "Mr. Reed, the entire crew wanted to give you this." Inside was a handwritten letter signed by not just this crew, but dozens of Liberty Airlines employees. "Mr. Reed, 6 months ago, you stood up for yourself and for all of us. You refused to accept injustice. You demanded better. And because of your courage, everything changed. We want you to know, we're proud to work for this airline now. We're proud of the changes we've made. We're proud to serve every passenger with dignity and respect. Thank you for believing we could be better. Thank you for making us better. You didn't just change one flight. You changed an entire industry. And you changed us." Jonathan's eyes misted. He looked up at Laura and smiled. "Thank you. But you know what? You all did the hard work. You embraced the changes. You became better versions of yourselves. I just refused to stay silent. Sometimes, Laura said softly, that's exactly what the world needs. Someone who refuses to stay silent. The plane taxied toward the runway, its engines humming with power and promise. Jonathan looked out the window at the familiar sight of Atlanta disappearing below. But he wasn't thinking about Atlanta. He was thinking about everything that had happened since that day 6 months ago. The investigation had revealed over 60 complaints. The reforms had touched thousands of employees. The ripple effects had reached dozens of airlines. The movement had inspired countless people to speak up about their own experiences. All because he'd refused to accept a sandwich when he'd ordered salmon. No, that wasn't quite right. All because he'd refused to accept being treated as less than human. His phone buzzed. A text from Dana. Latest quarterly report is out. Discrimination complaints down 73%. Customer satisfaction up 41%. Employee morale highest it's been in 5 years. We're actually living up to our name now. Thank you, Jonathan. He smiled and texted back. We did it together. And we're not done yet. Because there was more work to do. There always would be. Discrimination doesn't disappear overnight. Biases don't vanish just because you implement a training program. Change is constant, difficult, ongoing work. But it was possible. That was the lesson of Flight 228. Change was absolutely possible. As the plane climbed through the clouds, Jonathan reflected on a conversation he'd had with his mother a few days after the incident. She'd asked him, "Baby, do you think what you did will really make a difference? Or will things just go back to normal once the attention dies down?" He'd thought about it for a long time before answering. "Mama, I don't know if it'll make a permanent difference. I don't know if every airline will change. I don't know if discrimination will end. But I know this, I had a choice. I could stay silent and accept it, or I could stand up. And I chose to stand up. Even if it only changes things for one person, one flight, one moment, that's worth it. That's always worth it." His mother had smiled with tears in her eyes. "I raised you right. The flight to Los Angeles was smooth. Perfect, even. Good food, good service, good conversation with fellow passengers who wanted to shake his hand and share their own stories of standing up, speaking out, refusing to accept injustice." When the plane landed in Los Angeles 3 hours later, Jonathan gathered his briefcase and prepared to deplane. Laura appeared at his seat one more time. "Mr. Reed, I just wanted to say, on behalf of all of us, thank you. Not just for what you did, but for how you did it. You could have been angry, vindictive. You could have destroyed people just because you had the power to. But you were gracious. Firm but gracious. You reminded us that justice doesn't have to be cruel. It just has to be fair." Jonathan stood, adjusting his green suit jacket. "Laura, all I did was ask to be treated fairly. That shouldn't be revolutionary. But until it's not, people like us need to keep standing up, keep speaking out, keep refusing to accept anything less than dignity." He walked off the plane, through the jetway, into LAX. The California sunshine streamed through the massive windows. Travelers rushed past him in all directions, diverse, busy, beautiful chaos of humanity. Somewhere in this airport, someone was probably experiencing discrimination. Someone was probably being made to feel like they didn't belong. Someone was probably deciding whether to speak up or stay silent. Jonathan hoped they'd speak up. Hoped they'd find their courage. Hoped they'd remember that change starts with one person refusing to accept injustice. He pulled out his phone and posted something on social media for the first time since the incident went viral. Just a simple message. 6 months ago, I wore a green suit on a plane and everything changed. But here's what I learned. It wasn't about the suit. It wasn't about the flight. It was about refusing to accept being treated as less than. It was about standing up even when it's scary. It was about believing that fairness matters more than comfort. To everyone who's ever felt like you don't belong, you do. You absolutely do. Stand up. Speak out. Change the world. One moment at a time. He attached a photo, himself in that green suit, standing in front of a Liberty Airlines plane, smiling. Within minutes, the comments flooded in. Thousands of people sharing their own stories. Thanking him. Telling him he'd given them courage. promising to speak up next time they witnessed injustice. Jonathan smiled and put his phone away. He had meetings to attend, work to do, a life to live. But he'd never forget Flight 228, the humiliation, the stand, the change, and he'd never stop wearing green suits. Because that suit had become more than just clothing. It was a symbol, a reminder, a promise that dignity matters, justice is possible, and one person's courage can absolutely change the world. 1 year after Flight 228, Liberty Airlines was a different company. Employee retention was up. Customer satisfaction was at an all-time high. Profits had actually increased, proving that doing the right thing and doing good business weren't mutually exclusive. The Diversity Review Council had handled over 200 complaints in its first year. Some resulted in terminations, others in retraining. A few were determined to be misunderstandings. But every single one was taken seriously, investigated thoroughly, handled with care. The quarterly transparency reports had become an industry standard. Other airlines published their own data, and passengers used it to choose which airlines to fly. Competition drove improvement. Transparency drove accountability. And Jonathan? He'd become an unlikely spokesperson for workplace equality, not just in airlines but across industries. He gave speeches at conferences, consulted with companies on implementing fair practices, and always wore a green suit when he did. But his favorite moments weren't the speeches or the accolades. His favorite moments were the quiet ones. The texts from passengers thanking him for making their flights more comfortable. The emails from employees who felt empowered to speak up when they witnessed problems. The photos people sent of themselves wearing green in solidarity, standing up in their own lives against their own injustices. Change wasn't finished. It never is. But it was happening. Real, measurable, meaningful change. All because one man refused to accept a sandwich when he'd ordered salmon. All because one man chose courage over comfort. All because one man believed that fairness wasn't too much to ask. And that green suit, it's in the Smithsonian now, part of their civil rights collection. A symbol of modern resistance. A reminder that justice doesn't always look like marches and protests. Sometimes it looks like a man sitting quietly in seat 2A, refusing to accept being treated as less than human. Sometimes revolution happens at 30,000 feet. Sometimes all it takes is one person saying, "This isn't right, and I won't accept it." Sometimes that's enough to change everything. Thank you for reading the story of Jonathan Reed and Flight 228. May we all have the courage to stand up when it matters. May we all refuse to accept injustice. And may we all remember, fairness isn't expensive. Discrimination is. Fly safely. Fly fairly. Fly with dignity. What happened on that flight wasn't just about Jonathan Reed. It was about every person who's ever been judged before being known. His green suit became a symbol of respect, courage, and change. So tell me, if you were in his shoes, would you have stayed silent or stood up? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe respect should never depend on race, title, or appearance, hit that like button, share this story, and subscribe for more powerful real-life lessons.